Today?
Summer people.
Oh, this is the only one tonight.
Oh, good.
Yeah, you got married meeting late.
This is a pretty easy night.
One thing I wanted to ask
Those people don't
Frank,
vote.
while we've got you here.
Yeah.
I'm a member of Major Walden's in Barrington.
Yeah,
And,
we go.
You know, sportsman's association, mostly people go to the tire show. Would you be interested in going over there?
Yeah.
Is that something? Okay. Because that's definitely, you know,
We like to,
very
we like to
well-known
tackle.
audience there. The main issue is going to be Second Amendment, so.
That's like all. Yeah. That's right.
So, it's really nothing formal, just, say what you want to say. We'll
Okay.
ask you questions.
All right. How's everyone doing?
Good.
Charlie, could you share your contact stuff for me?
Yeah.
So, I can give a brief little intro. I think we all know each other here for the most part. So, let me start with, 2012. We obviously had a disappointing outcome of that election, and there's, I think, a lot of reasons for that. Nationally, I think we got defined. I think here in New Hampshire we got defined. President Obama's campaign team was very effective in turning out new voters in the state of New Hampshire, which we didn't keep up with as a party.
Yeah, just to emphasize on that, I was talking to the police chief just right now after the election. And he was at the polls, and he said almost every one of the new voters who showed up for that same day registration was a young woman, 25 to 28 range, with younger kids all saying this is out of the war on women who were fighting back. This is about all the voting Democrats.
Well, it seems like that now that we've had some time to look at who are the new voters. We're still having difficulty. I understand that some of these voters are not able to be located. So there was some irregularity, I think, in the state of New Hampshire. But that being said, here we are in 2014, and I think there's a strong opportunity to pick up seats for a number of reasons. I think first, the president's approval numbers have sunk so low that they are negatively impacting Democrats. Secondly, the intensity, I think, is more on the Republican side. And third, independents seemingly appear like they're going to the Republican side in 2014. So I look at that all as good news in the opportunity to pick up seats here in New Hampshire and nationally. What I think we need to do a better job of, though, because since '06, New Hampshire has been, a swing state. And that's not serving the state well. There's been very little consistency relative to who's representing the 1st congressional and the 2nd congressional district. And that doesn't serve anybody and anyone well at all. So we've got to figure out a way to be more effective in our get out the vote efforts, more effective in reaching out to people maybe that we traditionally haven't reached out to. And we've got to find unregistered voters that should participate and would certainly benefit by participating in election day. I think if we can do that, New Hampshire can stay the way it used to be in terms of what we were electing. We were a pretty fiscally conservative state. That's not happening anymore. When you look at the votes between Dean Shaheen and Carol Shea Porter and Amy Custer and even what Maggie Hassan discusses. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, but we have to start to recognize we need to do this a little bit differently.
We have an opportunity coming up. We do have an opportunity. We have to do something this time around, and not be. I hate to say it, but it seems like we got a bounce back in New Hampshire from some of the things that have happened in the past, and we just need to take this step. But I think if we do it in a more, I don't want to say the word moderate, I don't like that word, but in a more fiscally responsible manner, so that we don't end up with the hatred that seems to go from party to party, and try to do some good things with it.
Well, I think you have to sell to the independents. So and, you know, we can get our message across without getting people scared or using anger. We can say, we got a better product, here's a good product.
You think? Because I would suggest that this is, and I don't like to say this. Okay? So, but here we go. The Republican message was, we ran the state for 30 years or so with the ice tax, no sales tax, rental tax. When the Democrats took that issue away from us, we have won exactly one gubernatorial election since then. One. We've got 3 teams, 4 wins, and it's looking like we're on our way to a second 90%. 60% approval rate.
It's still early. It's still early.
Yeah, today's polls, I don't think mean much.
No,
Way too soon.
because it's summertime.
60% at a time when the Democrat Party, because of what's been going on in Washington, is not in high esteem. I think it does mean something.
And also, at
And,
times,
and
you
don't
pass
forget,
nothing.
these guys have been winning.
Oh,
These guys have been winning with huge margins. This has been close elections, right? There's a lot of Republicans that have been voting for these Democrat governors. And I think the problem, now, and let's just take this one step further, the development starts. 2010, we swept the House and Senate.
Right.
The state was in a fiscal mess.
The State House and the State Senate.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. The House, and the state itself was a fiscal mess, right? That legislature filled an $800 million hole, cut something like 17 taxes and fees,
Right.
right?
And we had a surplus last year, right?
And lost the next election.
Right.
But
So-
the next election was defined, the Democrats in 2012 did a very good job of defining what a Republican was. And that permeated, for the first time, I think, in New Hampshire, from top down and bottom up.
Yeah, they ran ads on the radio saying that, basically Republicans were going to take away the ability to buy
I
or.
think it was about $1 million spent on me on that very issue.
They
and,
pounded the social issue, and they will again. But what, my question to you, what block of voters do we really, can we capture that is open to be captured?
Well,
It's gotta be young.
the young vote typically comes out in a higher percentage in a presidential election.
And then don't bother.
Yeah. And then in the off year, they the percentage is much lower.
Oh.
But there is I think a group of registered voters who are the undeclareds who tend to go back and forth. And right now, they are leaning heavily Republican. Now, as you said earlier, just a few minutes ago, it's early. So it's hard to say today what's going to happen in November.
I don't think
But-
that Maggie Hassett has defined herself. She's doing the same thing that John Lynch did.
John Lynch won 4 times.
He
What
did.
she does is she shows up at the first leaf changing,
Right.
the first snowfall, she rides around in snow truck, snow plows,
Yep.
she goes to this thing and that thing and everything else, so people don't know anything about her.
And she doesn't do it.
If you,
She gives you right
you
out
ask
the
the average
about it.
person on the street, what was her major proposal for the year? It was having casinos in New Hampshire, and they didn't pass,
No.
by your own party.
Right.
But
So-
most people won't even know that.
So how do we use that type of a scenario to help our situation? You know, we know that she's gonna be like, she came out and campaigned and said she wanted to be just like John Lynch. John Lynch was a governor of the people by being out there all the time, you know, at every photo opportunity, et cetera, but he really didn't do a lot. You know, there were a lot of times he didn't vote on stuff, he just, not vote, but he didn't sign legislation, he just let it pass. He
He didn't do much of anything. He was a nice guy.
He was a
very
great
nice,
guy.
Smiling, and saying, here I am, I'm the governor, I'm here to help. That's what he did. Right. And you know what? With the weakest governor in the nation, that's not a bad thing.
How do we?
Our governor has practically no power. The veto pen is the governor's power.
That's it.
Right? And he used that a few times to support his base.
Just, Frank, so just get really specific on it initially. The one that's come up now, and how do you counteract this? We have this, the so-called Hobby Lobby decision out there, which, as I think most people in this room realize, but most people don't realize, that aren't very informed, which is the majority of people, regretfully, that that was based on a law that was signed by Bill Clinton and voted in favor of by Harry Reid. It was 97-3 in the Senate, and now you have Jean Shaheen and Carol Shea Porter come out and making statements that this decision was preventing women's access to birth control, which has nothing to do with whatsoever. And it's based on a law that the Democrats were in favor of.
Well, look, it's very clear to me that the strategy from the Democratic Party, national and local, state, is to take whatever issue, try to define the Republicans, and this is a good example. This decision doesn't take away
Anyone's right for anything.
it doesn't. But they say that it does, and they repeat that statement over and over and over again, which if you repeat something enough, it becomes truth in the minds of some voters.
Right.
So that's an example of now, I think the electorate is a little tired of, after now almost 6 years of this president, I think the electorate's getting tired of, it's someone else's fault. You can only govern that way for so long. And I'd remind people, when I became mayor in Manchester.
That.
Yeah,
Presentation.
well, when we poll people in the state of New Hampshire on this particular issue, they're not buying what the Democrat strategy is. So we do a lot of survey work to get a sense of what people are thinking, and they're not buying it. So as a candidate, we have a pretty good sense of what the average New Hampshire citizen thinks of
So as a candidate, how do you respond to it?
Well, what you say, what you call it for what it is, it's nonsense.
Yeah, I agree. I think the proper response is ridicule.
I mean, you can't ignore it. Look, I think far too long. Actually, before we keep getting deeper and deeper into this, I just want to make sure everyone knows that I know you're from America. Are you from American Bridge as well? Are you from the Democratic Party? You are. Okay. So we have someone from the Democratic Party here, and we have American Bridge, which typically records these meetings, and then we'll use them. They'll give them, they're a third-party group. They'll give them to the Democrats so they can use it against us in TV ads and radio ads and things of that nature.
Oh, okay.
So just wanted to make sure everyone's
Thanks
aware.
for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Who's with us. And maybe we could ask, since you represent the Democratic Party, maybe we could ask you some questions about your strategy.
That would be fun.
But the reality is you have to call it for what it is. You can't ignore it, because when you ignore it, people, if they don't hear an alternative, they tend to believe what they're hearing.
But seriously, I think the response, the proper response, was ridicule. And I'll tell you, that incident, I don't know, last weekend. So I'm in the gym, locker room, I just played racquetball, I'm in the locker room, there's this person on television, woman, I don't know, general, some news program, and they're keep talking about women being defined. Because of this decision, women are going to be defined by the employer's choice of how to provide health care, contraception. Right? And I just looked at the guy who was over there, and imagine that, being defined by how their employer is going to choose to provide them an employment benefit. If that's what defines you as a person, who are you? Right? And I hear that stuff, that's all I'm going to do. That's pretty pathetic to think that somebody's going to be defined in the first place by some benefit their employer may or may not provide. Never mind the seriousness of the benefit. But I don't like that. I think the benefit.
Well, I think the electorate, particularly in New Hampshire, is concerned about job opportunity, economic growth, safety
Yeah,
for the family, education.
We got much jobs now than we had in 2007, I mean.
Yeah, look, from 2008 to 2012, we had negative economic growth in the state of New Hampshire. Most people don't know that statistic. And since then, I think it's been about 2%, roughly. So, this has not been a stellar 6 years.
No, we're down about one.
Now, in New Hampshire, because the unemployment rate is lower than the national average, people can use that figure and say, look, everything is great. Well, they forget that, unemployment in New Hampshire, when it's low, is around 3.2%.
Well,
So we're still far above that.
We're still down over 40,000 jobs, and we were just.
Not just that, but the average weekly wages
Yeah.
by industry are either, in most cases, stagnant or declining. There's one industry that's going through the roof.
Government.
Yes. In terms of growth and in terms of average weekly wage increase. But the private sector is not there. It's just not there. And, we are obviously.
So no wonder
stable.
everybody's stressed over your taxes.
Yeah, well, people should be.
That's the way it's going. isn't it?
People have a right to be concerned and angry about how state and federal government are spending their dollars, because people are having a harder time earning those dollars, number one. Number two, inflation is increasing everything around us. So you think about it, you wake up,
Oh,
you
there's
go,
any inflation. Come on, don't you see the numbers they put out?
but you go to get your coffee in the morning, that's more expensive today than it was 6 months ago. You get gas or oil, you fill up your tank, it's what, about 370, 365, somewhere depending on where you are, per gallon. You go to work, you go out to lunch, it's costing you more today than it was 6, 8 months ago, 10 months ago for
Go to the
lunch.
grocery store.
You go to the grocery store at the end of the day,
Holy
it's
moly.
almost a 20% increase. So you have less earning power, the money is harder to spread around, and this is where I think families are most focused and most concerned.
I think so, yeah.
And when you think about that, and you think about the president's numbers and where, and these aren't just, these national polls that are done about the president, they're not asking just Republicans, they're asking Republicans, Independents, and Democrats.
Right.
And, I mean, just look at the latest fiasco with what's going on with the border crossings, and you've got Democrat members of Congress who are livid with this president, and publicly stating so, for good reason. So I think there is, the Democratic Party has a big problem in what are they going to proactively say they're going to do or have done?
Well, they tried everything they pretty much used up every arrow in their quiver. The only thing they can say is, just like they talked about the New Deal, Franklin Delano Roosevelt didn't spend enough money, that's why it didn't work.
Well, they could try that argument. They could try that argument
That's the
again.
reason the stimulus didn't work.
I
It
don't.
wasn't big enough.
Yeah, they tried that stimulus argument for a little while. It didn't work out well, so I don't think they'll try that argument again.
But you mentioned the border situation here. One of the issues I never hear anybody really speak of is, if you look at the similarity to what's been going on in Florida with Cuba over the years, and basically the way it works is, if you're in water, then you go back to Cuba. But once you've touched dry land, then you're eligible for an immigration hearing in the United States. Why isn't someone bringing up that as the same issue in Texas or wherever other people come across? Simply don't let them into the country. Then you don't have to give them an immigration hearing. You just say, you don't come across the border. If you try, we're going to pick you up and put you back on the other side. Because once they're in the United States, then they have this hearing. We know that over half of them don't show up to the hearing when they have a date.
Well, there's a couple things. First of all, the president 2 years ago in 2012 issued a memorandum to the Department of Homeland Security, which essentially changed the status of an illegal immigrant. And that was just reissued, I think, in May, June of this year. So, what I think the media and the White House has been focusing on is the quote-unquote humanitarian tragedy or travesty of 50, 55,000 kids. That really is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there's 300,000 people who have been detained since April, which a lot of people haven't heard of that number. And it's in direct relation to, or in response to, the change in, it wasn't an executive order, it was a memorandum that was issued. Now, the Homeland Security Secretary was just down in Texas the other day, and I watched the press conference, and he said that they will be deporting everybody that comes back. Now, that's what He says he represents this administration. So we'll see if that's the case. So
If you
far,
have them show up for the immigration
we know
hearing,
that's
that
not-
means you
well,
don't lose that.
now, that's the key. He was questioned about the immigration hearing process, and I don't think he gave a clear answer as to whether these people will be deported with or without an immigration hearing. The reality is that, our obligation is to take care of people as humanely as we possibly can while they're here, but they are illegal, they're coming here illegally, and they need to be, reunited with their families, so they can have prosperous opportunities for either a legal process for coming to America, or another country that their family might want to move to if they're having challenges in their home country. And you hear that from Republicans and from Democrats.
So here's a question, and it's just, that's all it is. Right? This law, okay, everybody's talking about, is in fact on the book about, and it has to do with children. Have to get the hearing. And the reason they did that was to try and reduce sex trafficking of children. Now, the House, the Senate, could just go in and just change that anytime they want. But they're not. Or I haven't heard of any effort to do so.
Well, some oppose that at one point.
My question would be,
Right?
well, why not? Even if it's only a temporary thing where they say, we're gonna put this in abeyance.
I think that-
Suspension for a year, or 2 years, until we change our mind again, right? Why don't they just do that? Why don't the Republicans enough?
Because Harry Reid won't bring it up for a vote.
But if they,
He
look,
stops everything.
If this is the problem, and the President, the administration are saying, this is the problem, the law is what it is, and we are following the law, which praise God, he's following
Yeah,
the
he's
law.
hiding behind the law.
That's fine,
written.
but that's wonderful, he's supposed to hide behind the law,
But he,
right? So why?
When he
not
wants to, but not when he doesn't
But
want to.
that's another discussion, so why don't
I
we
know.
just change it? Why doesn't it just go change it, give it to the Senate, and then make that the issue?
they could, and I haven't, there could be plans for that I'm not privy to. I do think you do it regardless of what the makeup of the Senate is, and if the Senate doesn't want to take it up, then, so be it. Then
That's another issue that we can put on the
exactly.
table.
But the reality is that the president has changed the law through a memorandum, not even an executive order, through a memorandum, which interpreted rather differently the current laws on the books. So, you're up against the White House and you're up against the do-nothing Senate right now in terms of how to deal with they're trying to make a short-term problem a long-term issue. Because, again, for political purposes. So, yeah, which as an American
So we
frustrates me.
can't play this game? We
No,
can't
well,
do something
we're
for
above it, but we're above it.
political purposes? Make a big show about that?
We're above that. We are above that. I served for 2 years, and you take that seriously. I understand what you're saying.
And I understand you as well.
I am, as an American, as someone who has served, it pains me to watch the games that this president plays with issues.
And it is the game that's poisoning the process.
And it does. And people,
we shouldn't have.
the other day, it was yesterday, I think, yesterday or today, I don't know, within the last couple of days, Joe Biden was speaking to the National Governors.
Joe Biden.
He was speaking to the National
Nobody
Governors
laughed.
Association, Republicans and Democrats. And, he made the comment that he hadn't seen it this bad in Washington. Now, he's been in Washington for around 20, 30 years, however long he's been there. And he said, look, it's incumbent upon you governors to sort of take the country out of the challenge that it's in. And this is for a sitting vice president to say.
It's up to the government.
That's up to the governors.
That's
I
an
mean,
interesting thing.
you as a president and as a vice president have a lot of authority to sit down. And I really do think that Vice President Biden has tried to work with the Senate when the
There's a lot-
president has dispatched him.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of things to be talked about why it's so bad, right? But I would say that the most obvious thing, as far as why the political climate is so bad, is Obamacare. Look at how they did that, right? Even with the election of Scott Brown, which would have stopped it, right? They went and changed the rules in the Senate to get it done.
Yeah,
Right? They just jammed that down everybody's throat, right? And if that doesn't create a lot of hate and discontent, I don't know what would. And if they- if
Well,
they're
amongst
surprised-
young people and
I'm talking
moderate
about-
Democrats.
I'm talking about
Do
within.
not like the ACA.
I'm talking
I
about-
just went through 2 months of hell to get my son, who works in Maine, lives here as a legal resident. There's no place for him to go. He can't have any doctors in Maine, because all we have is Anthem, thanks to Jean Shaheen, and what, 1994, when she was in the
Level
state
playing
senate,
field, yeah.
they all fled the state like rats in a sinking ship.
That's right.
You know, and I think Scott Brown has so much to run on, he doesn't know where to begin, if he gets the nomination, which he doesn't have yet. But the Affordable Care Act is not liked by young people. At least the ones who have looked at it and understand it. Now, a lot of them pay no attention to it.
They will, it's going to be forced on. But let me
Yes,
ask you a
they'll have to.
question on a specific issue that's come up, it's actually come up this week very heavily in the New England Governors Meeting for years, meeting up at Mount Washington Hotel. And this is so-called Governor's Energy Infrastructure Initiative. Are you familiar with that?
No.
Okay, well, what they're proposing to do is to circumvent the market, because they say the market doesn't work. Well, the market doesn't work because FERC, and this is why it's really a federal issue, because this is going to have to be approved by FERC once we go into it. FERC has got so many rules and regulations on how you can build pipelines that no one will build them. And of course, if the government steps in and says, well, we'll come up with a way to finance it, and no one's going to try to challenge that. But what their idea is that every ratepayer in New England will pay a little bit higher on their electric rate. There'll be an additional tariff. And that money will be collected up by some yet-to-be-named entity and then given to finance a new pipeline. And then the idea is if there's more pipelines, you have more natural gas, the price is lower, and then you'll save more in electric rates than you cost
And
higher.
this is just for the New England states?
Just for the New England states, but it would have to require FERC approval because it would be on the
Where
ISO.
would it go from Canada?
No, this would be a gas line from out in Pennsylvania where the shale gas is,
Okay.
out in that area. And then also involved in that is a plan to bring down hydropower from Canada.
Right.
Because Massachusetts and Connecticut both have state laws that mandate reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. And the only way they can meet them is with large amounts of hydropower from Canada, because obviously they're not going to build any nuclear reactors, which would be large source of power otherwise it doesn't produce greenhouse gas. So this is all part of the package. You know,
You
we have-
build a nuclear plant.
well, yeah, you're not going to do that, though. So, NG has already come out and said that they'll build Northern Pass and they'll finance it themselves. What this thing would do is say, oh, no, you don't have to worry about that. We'll finance to what they call socializing the cost. So everybody in New England pays more on the transmission tariff for it. And we bring these 3 transmission lines down. Of course, they've even asked them to come out and said, oh, if we do it that way, it's wonderful because there'll be more money so we can put it underground now, which costs us will just cost more. So instead of NU's ratepayers taking the risk to build this thing and making money based on market conditions, the risk would all be transferred, well, the way FERC does it, all to the transmission people who have the transmission bill. Look at your electric bill. More than half of it's now something other than electricity, energy.
Yeah.
And that's all FERC. That's all FERC. This is all federal government stuff. I mean, FERC just came out 2 weeks
where are you
ago.
going with this, Mike?
Well, I just want to know if you, I think you
Well,
should look into that.
Yeah, no, I will, but based on what you're telling me, I don't like what I hear.
No, it's they're circumventing the market.
What, and that's not the solution, right, you know.
And at best it would be temporary because you would only, once you started, if you did do it, and you kept the locational marginal prices of electricity and wholesale costs down, then you would put like oil plants and other plants like that, some of the coal plants out of business. You'd replace them with more natural gas, and you'd be right back in the same situation you were now 5 to 6 years from now.
And after the pipeline's built, they never do away with that.
Oh, no, they
Oh,
charge states for
yeah, that'll
20
be
years
there forever.
regardless, right? Even if they never complete it, if for some reason they only build half of it and decide it's not a good idea, the ratepayers are still going to be on the hook.
Well, it's interesting to look at the bill, like you say. Half of it is various subsidies and taxes, and when it gets down to the price per kilowatt hour, it's only like half. It's ridiculous.
But I mean, just something you might want to take a look at, because it's definitely going to have to go through FERC. And, FERC also just approved they lowered the ROE, the return on equity for transmission, but they didn't lower it anywhere near enough that they should. It's still way too high. It's still going to be close to 11%. And, look at your bank account. If you're getting 0.25% interest, you're doing damn good, right? And they're getting 11% return on equity, and it's guaranteed. If they start to build a transmission project, and for any reason that project gets canceled, something beyond their control, and they never finish it, they're going to get 100% of their costs.
So one of the things I was thinking of, Frank, is if you could, yeah, you don't have to do this tough speech, but just give us like an overview of what you see as far as, you know, your vision for coming on in and how, you know, everybody gets into this because they think they can help and they can help make it better. So why don't you just give us like a
What
brief,
big issues do you
you know,
want?
like, you know, let's give you like 10 or 15 minutes to just do a little bit of a monologue, and then we'll dive back in with questions and things like that. Because, you know, this is a big deal, and we really appreciate you, you know, taking a run at it.
Well,
In other words, you know, let's give you a shot to define yourself in a positive way as we see it.
well, I hope I've already done that with this group, but if I haven't.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, for what it's worth, you know, I'm gonna have like 20 words out for class, so, you know, I try to push this out.
Do you have any idea what Shea Porter's gonna run on? She's not gonna run on ACA.
Yeah, we're sold, Frank,
I'm not
Frank,
sure.
we're sold.
Yeah.
But as long as we.
I'm not so
Well,
sure.
she says you can fix it. She says you can fix it, and you can't fix it.
Yeah. Look,
Too complicated.
so let me start with, you know, I made this decision to run again over the summer. I spent some time with my wife and my kids. Colby and Jack are 10 and 9, and they're old enough to know what it's like to campaign and what it's like to be away. So, you know, they have just as much of a reason to be part of the conversation as anybody else. So we took some time over the summer to talk about it as a family, and my Morgan has always said, and typically we'll probably continue to say, look, if this is what you want to do, I support you 100%. You know, this is important to you, and it's been, I've known you, longer than I haven't known you, so in terms of how old you are, so it's, you know, I know that these things are important to us, so I'll support that. But the kids, you know, they were a little bit different. They looked at it through the lens, and we've always tried to teach our kids that no matter where you are in life, you always try to help someone. And the kids said, well, Dad, you've said that this is how you try to help people, by serving. And you like helping people, and if you want to continue to help people, you should run. And I responded by saying, look, the campaign is time consuming. It takes me away from the family. And, you know, I had a lot of time with the family in 2013. It was very nice for the first time in a long time, for me to be able to spend time with them. It was fantastic for them, for us, for me. But ultimately, that's the lens that they saw it through. And I said, okay, well, we'll spend the rest of 2013 together. But then come 2014, I will be, full-time campaigning. And I decided to make that decision because at that point, halfway through 2013, the country hadn't gotten any better. I mean, things were getting worse. Carol Shea Porter had not changed anything about her, how she served the office, ran the office, served the constituents. As a matter of fact, she's less accessible now than she was before. You know, I mean, you can say that she had a passion. She was an anti-war candidate in 06, and she was very accessible back then. And it seems like every year she's gotten less accessible. In this term, I think she's had one town hall meeting, which essentially was from what I understand, more invite only. Yeah, than anything else. Which is just not the New Hampshire way of doing things. And there's one issue about how you vote and whether you think you're being a good reflection of your district. But there's a whole nother side of how accessible you are, what you're doing for the specific constituents beyond your voting record. And there's a lot that you can do. We're a small state. We've got to work together as a delegation because we're a small state. And I don't think that by objective measures, Carol has served in a capacity where people feel like she's accessible and they can reach out to her for help. And that to me, when you are a public servant, that's a large part of your responsibility. And I compared that to when I served, and we had I don't know, a couple dozen town hall meetings just here in New Hampshire. I did the job fairs around the state, which, by the way, she criticized me for particularly when I did it for veterans. I don't know how you can criticize that. but she found a way to criticize it. I actually ran into a woman up in North Conway a few months ago who introduced herself to me and said, I have my job today because of the job fair you held in Conway.
Awesome.
And to meet somebody, it does.
Yeah.
To be able to meet somebody who you have helped during this time when it was such an economic challenge. So there are moments like that when serving can make a difference to people.
Oh, sure.
And so as I decided, through this process, talked to the family, they were okay with it. I assessed whether I thought Carol Shea Porter was being a strong representative to the district in terms of constituent service, and I didn't think she was meeting that requirement. And I don't think that she's done much to try to define herself differently than she has in the past. She typically has always been sort of a follower of Nancy Pelosi. And I don't think that that's changed. And I think she puts...
Still in the 98% category as far as I know.
Well, I
Some
think...
Democrats do a lot better than Republicans in this country.
Yeah, well, I think that, so all of those things sort of put together, and then looking at what I think the needs of the country are, and the kind of leadership the country needs, I decided to run. And where, I have been focusing my time and attention is fiscal responsibility. And we have to have economic growth. In order to have economic growth, we need tax reform in this country so we can be more competitive internationally. And we can have more, opportunity, not just here in New Hampshire, but all over the country. We need to have a balanced budget, and we need to do that through not just a balanced budget amendment, like everybody else has to do. I had to do it when I was mayor. Governors have to do it. Families have to do it. Business owners have to do it. The only entity that seems to not have to balance the budget is the federal government. And by the way, I remind people of this. I know members of Congress can balance the budget because, for the simple fact that they have their own.
Yeah, true.
And if you go over that budget, you're personally liable. Not many people know that fact.
So you as a congressman...
You as a congressman are personally liable if your office goes over that budget. You are personally responsible for the United States Treasury.
Oh, wow.
And guess what? Nobody ever goes over the budget.
Wow.
So, it's why I supported legislation that tied performance to pay. It's why I believe in term limits, because I think you go to Washington for a certain period of time, fix things, and then move on in your life. And there's always, it's always important to have fresh, new ideas and new minds coming with perspectives that maybe you don't have because you're there too long. So I think that, again, if we deal with the economic side, if we can balance our budget, if we can, for the long term, preserve and protect Medicare and Social Security, because right now that's not the case. And both of those.
Can you be a little more specific on
Well,
what we can do to change Social Security?
We tried with Medicare when I was in, and the Democrats did a very good job of calling the Ryan budget. They used that against us. I was on the budget committee. I served on that committee. We worked as a committee to try to craft what we thought was responsible reduction in spending. We couldn't get the tax component because that's Ways and Means, and we couldn't get anything out of the Senate. But we were able to at least make proposals on Medicare. And, what never got around to most of the country is the proposals were largely based on Bill Clinton and Bill Clinton's people, their ideas. The Democrats loved them when Bill was in office, and the Democrats used them against us when it served their purpose. But, we wanted to, for future retirees, not existing retirees, tweak the formula a little bit. And that, to the Democrats, was dismantling, Medicare.
Do you see means testing coming to Social Security eventually?
I think there's going to be a lot of different options. Means testing is always in the mix, and you have to figure out where, that number is. But I suspect that will be part of the conversation. I think there will be, a number of things that will end up being in the mix that passes, that can pass both the House and the Senate. What I think we really need is somebody who's willing to sit at the table and try to figure it out. Right now, I don't know that Carol has ever made a legitimately in-depth proposal as to how to fix it beyond just raising
No,
taxes.
bro.
What's that?
No, bro.
In her mind?
That's the Democrats always say, the Democrats.
Well, when you have the nonpartisan, testimony that comes before the Budget Committee in front of Republicans and the Democrats and says if you don't do something, it will go broke. When you have the CBO that says if you don't do something, it will go broke.
They
They're not
put
giving.
out the annual statements, didn't they?
Yeah, well.
Because I used to get those, and I used to use the statement on the front of the Social
Right.
Security thing that came from the Board of Trustees, talking about how broke Social Security was.
Yeah.
In these arguments, I still do. The last one I got in 2011, 2010, something like that. And when we get into this, I said, well, this is what they said in 2010 to the trustees of the Social Security.
Well, I used to say that, and
But it doesn't seem to matter. To people who have the other view, they can go, well, no, it's not broke.
well, you go back to that. I think the Democrats were better at communicating a message that defined Republicans. And
They go to the heart, not the head.
yeah, that's a good way of putting it. So we've got to get better, because once you start looking at the issue, when you ask somebody, would you like Medicare to be solvent, or would you like it to go broke in whatever it is, 2029, 2030, somewhere around there. But when you ask people that statement, they say, well, obviously we don't want it to go broke. Everybody agrees on that. Well, most everybody. Maybe a few don't, but the vast majority of people agree on that. And then when you start to look at the different things that would be acceptable, but acceptable in changes, then that's where things change a little bit. And the reality is, you need a president who's going to lead.
Isn't this the same with everything? We ask people, do we want to have a balanced budget? They say yes. When you ask them any specific things, they say no.
Well, but that's why you need to elect people who are willing to make the tough choices and come back and answer why those decisions were made. And that's what frustrates me. Most people, they want these solutions. They may not like one component of a solution or the other, but the reality is people want good leaders who are going to make these decisions, who are going to make these tough decisions, and then come home and answer for them. I used to say when I was mayor of Manchester, we had 14 aldermen. I never had a majority. There were 2 Republicans, 1 independent, and 11 Democrats. I needed 8 votes to get anything done. So you do the math, right? I never blamed the legislative body. As the chief executive of the city, I figured out how to work with Democrats, and I did, guess what, get a tax cut. We did cut borrowing by 50%. We did things together in a way. I didn't get everything that I wanted, every proposal that I made. We spent a lot of time fighting for the spending cap, and it was a 4-year battle. We finally got the spending cap in, but that was a battle. So not everything worked, over just having debates and a little meeting of the minds. I mean, there were some things that we had to fight on. But we got a lot of things accomplished because of leadership, because of the way that, I treated people with respect. They treated me with respect. Would we have some disagreements and arguments? Sure. But it never got out of hand. It never got out of hand. And if there's something did get out of hand, I used to remember all the Danny O'Neill, who's an alderman, who's still an alderman, who would get frosted about something. At the end of the, afterwards, he'd come over to me, I'm sorry, Danny, he'd put his arm around me. I said, don't worry about it, Danny, and it would be over.
Yeah.
And the next day was the next day, and we'd work on something. That needs to exist at the federal level, and I think it starts with the chief executive. So when I think about what is Carol Shea Porter offering, and most people don't realize or appreciate that. I got 3 bills signed into law while I was in the minority. I mean, it was in the majority in the House, but I was in the minority in Washington. I got 3 pieces of legislation signed into law. She couldn't get one past the House when she was in the majority, in the House, the Senate, and had the presidency. And she used to talk about me that, oh, you know, your Congress was the least productive Congress in history.
That's some bad law.
Well, but again, it was all how they defined Republicans. So things will be different, you know, moving forward. I think most people know me, most people know Carol. A lot of people know us just through the 30-second TV ads, which is, you know, disappointing. That stuff is always going to happen and always going to be there. But, you know, we have to, as a campaign, work diligently to meet as many people as possible to spread, you know, this message of economic strength, fiscal discipline will lead to prosperity for every American. Every American. If you want it, if you desire it. And I think of it as, you know, when I was a kid, look, I was the first in my family to go to college. My parents didn't go to college. They ran a small business, still have it. And I was the first in my family to go to college, first in my family to go to graduate school, first to run for office. And I'm proud of those accomplishments, but they were through hard work. And I and my folks had to give a lot up. And, you know, Morgan and I kind of look at our kids, and we want them to have a better opportunity than we had. And I look at the country in the same way. And I just don't think that, I think the country, the people are adapting because they have to. But I don't think people feel like they're moving forward.
No, they don't.
And that's what takes away people's soul.
Just drive on this road right here in front of this library. From here to the post office. The road is the worst, I think it's one of the worst pieces of road in the state of New Hampshire. It's absolutely ridiculous. And the state doesn't have the money to fix it. The last year, the state of New Hampshire had a surplus. They had a surplus in the budget. Instead of returning that to the taxpayers or the general fund, that money, they were fighting over where we could spend it. Why not fix some of these roads? Our
Next door,
infrastructure.
at the Guard Training Center, I went as a historical society member because we have a bell that they have possession. And anyway, met with 2 civil engineers. They were young girls, they were very good, and they talked about the curved driveway. This is stimulus money. And they said, well, we're going to tear up the pavement. I said, the pavement's fine. It's only like 3 years old. Well, it will cost more if we dig up the pavement and put new pavement down, because we have this, I forget how many thousands it was, of stimulus money, and we have to spend it. And I gave up.
They've been putting a lot of money into that.
Yes. I think the point you made, which too many young people don't know anything about this, was Ronald Reagan used to sit with Chip O'Neill and get things done. That can't happen today.
Well, it could.
When does Barack Obama even talk to John Boehner? That just doesn't happen.
But I will tell you,
Forget
it's
it.
not.
But it has to come from the White House.
Yeah.
And it is.
But I will
Well,
tell
you
you,
know
it's-
that.
it's not just, it's not just.
200 rounds of golf.
It's deeper than that,
It's,
isn't it?
it's not, it is deeper than that. And if you ask Democrat members of Congress off the record, they'll never say it publicly. Well, maybe some of them will, but, you know, I ask them off the record how they are treated by this president. There's not a relationship. They're just as frustrated. They might be frustrated from a different perspective, but they don't, there's no, the White House, there was, I forget who, it was a Democrat, I thought it was a Democrat congressman recently that said, I forget exactly what he was talking about. Every office gets a White House liaison, and that's the person you're supposed to speak with on a regular basis. And, you know, I've met with the president several times, but you have these liaisons, and this one office, the Democrat office, couldn't even get a return phone call, I think, from their liaison, and then kind of was trying to go up the chain, and was so frustrated because as a congressman and as a member of the same party, he couldn't get any action on some issue, and he publicized it. It was a few months ago he publicized it, actually. But that has been, you know, there's a lot of media attention now focused on the president and how he is much more academic. He doesn't like the daily grind of Washington. More reporters are talking about that now, or willing to talk about that now, and more members of Congress, I think, are willing to probably talk about it. But when you talk to members of Congress privately, on the Democrat side, I mean, look, they might publicly.
He's still gonna be there for 2 more years, so.
Yes, but so here's what I think can happen. If the U.S. Senate flips to Republican in this election, the president's going to have two choices. Either listen to what the people just said,
Yeah, which he hasn't done yet, so.
and I'll hold out hopes that he will. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt for the moment.
Okay.
I will go in eyes wide open, and I will, for the betterment of the district and the state and the country, I will work with anybody who wants to work with me. And I would extend that invitation to the president as much as I would extend it to someone in our delegation, as much as I, extend it to people that I maybe fundamentally disagree with on issues. But, Barney Frank was a good example. I used to work with him on fisheries issues. And I'd come home and I would joke about trying to work with Barney Frank, and half the room would go crazy, and I'd say, time out, and I would explain what we were working on, and they were, logical issues I said, it can be done. I mean, you can, people of different philosophical opinions on big issues can find the local issues and work
Terry
together.
and I agree on casino gambling.
Who does? You?
Ron Terry and I.
Yeah.
He's a-
Relatively, Democratic.
But there are things that you can find agreement on. And, the fishing industry to Massachusetts and New Hampshire is pretty critical, pretty important. As a matter of fact, this is another one. Carol is actually, she turns her back on the fishing industry. She actually just voted against, not too long ago, an issue that the fishing industry here in New Hampshire needed, and she voted against it, which it's hard to contemplate that when you represent 17 miles of coast and you've got millions of dollars in economic output, and you've got these small boats that are, on the cusp with their livelihood. But at any rate, there are things that. So I think the president's going to have two choices. He's either going to have to listen to what the electorate said and try to work with Republicans. I'm not saying he's got to agree with everything that comes across his desk, but there is supposed to be a back and forth. Or he can ignore what the electoral process provided for the last 2 years. He can be obstinate, say no to everything. In which case, his defining moment, I think, would probably be the Affordable Care Act, which is what he wants. But it sets up, I think, whoever the nominee is on the Democrat side for a tougher challenge going into 2016, because the economy will not have improved if the president, if he doesn't want to take up tax reform, if he doesn't want to, try to get to a balanced budget before the end of his term, which,
Right.
Didn't he promise he would get that done by, I think, the end of his first term? I thought he did, right?
Yeah, he said it over and over.
So, we're still not there yet. I mean, he's have 2 more, but there are things that he,
Only $500 billion away.
and quite frankly, when I came in, it was closer to $1 billion. The one reason that we got down to $500 million was the Budget Control Act, which capped spending. And the Democrats take credit for the reduction in the deficit, but it was because of the Budget Control Act. And the House pushed that. It's one of the few
When you were
things.
in there?
Yeah, when I was there.
Well, you can sit there and veto. If we have the Senate and the House, the Senate put bills on the
Sure.
desk, he can veto.
But I'm interested, in the time that I'm there, I'm interested in getting something accomplished. So I hope that what he does is listens to what happened in this election and tries to pick 2 or 3 things that we can get accomplished. And, when you're talking about the economy, it's tax reform. Let's get some real tax reform. And maybe it's not the whole kit and caboodle, but maybe it's revisiting the lack of competitiveness we have around the world.
This is like, we're talking about this, and I was pleased to see what Andrew Hemingway had the union leader yesterday, I guess it was, today, about his proposal for corporate tax reform, business taxes, and tax reform in New Hampshire. You can't go around, because we're in the same thing, we've got very high business taxes.
We're 30th in the country, New Hampshire.
That's a total climate, sir. our business taxes are higher than that.
Yeah,
Right?
but if you're 30th compared to the other, you know, compared to all 50 states,
20,
you might as well be 50, because when
Nobody's
you're,
coming here, right?
when you're, right, when an executive team is looking at, I'm moving
Where to
to
go.
a state, you gotta be in the top 10. And there's 5 or 6 things you gotta be competitive on, and we're
Right.
not competitive
right.
in nearly
We're
enough.
hurting in energy costs, we're hurting in taxation, I mean, we're not in a good.
Skilled workforce, we're not
Right,
there
and
either.
Right, and this, just like you're talking about in your race, when we start talking about what's going on in New Hampshire, this is exactly what we have to be talking about.
Yeah.
So we gotta fix, we've had this, state's been under Democratic control, 20-something years. This is where we've gone. We went from having one of the highest, most productive states in the Union.
How long has Gene got left? 6 years.
Yeah, so this
Wait
is-
for 8. Four terms.
Yeah.
That's one.
And then
Now you do it, so you get,
10, 14.
or well, she's been one term.
So you get 16 of the last 18 years.
When you say tax reform, Frank, what specifically?
Well, let's just talk about the corporate side. I mean, our corporate tax rate is 35%. So when you compare us internationally to other first world countries, we don't even match up. Yeah, we're competing with countries that have 10, 12, 15% tax rates. So when you have 35, here's the example that I always use. Apple is a company that everyone loves. Apple has $7 billion with a B per quarter in net profits overseas.
Right.
Per quarter that don't come back to the United States. So that money gets reinvested in Ireland
Why doesn't it come back?
because of the corporate tax. So then what they do is they borrow money at 0.5% here to pay, and then they use those to repay. It's cheaper for them to borrow money here
And pay it another 0.5%.
and pay another 0.5% in, for the rate. And then whatever dollars are reinvested into the company are done outside of the United States, so that it's more infrastructure, it's more job creation. And, we're not, all because we're not competitive on tax rate. Now, previously what a Democrat would say, well, that's, you're helping corporations. Well, great, that's, okay, if that's what you think, but let's understand how our economy works.
Yeah.
Businesses
How many people
will
does
find
Apple
ways,
employ, right?
to find a better bottom line when they have options other than the United States. And it's got to change. And that, even if there are a number of Democrats now who are starting to see this and agree with it. I tried to before we could do tax reform, I said, well, why don't we repatriate some of those dollars? So give sort of a holiday, bring it down at 5 or 6 or 7%, and you would have had hundreds of millions of dollars come in. To the Treasury, by the way.
Right.
I mean, to the Treasury, to pay down our debt.
There's
So
trillions of dollars sitting out there.
there's trillions sitting out there. So, I tried to get that moving, and we had a pretty good effort. Couldn't get it to the floor, a vote to the floor, but it was, and that's for complicated reasons. But there are those who want to do tax reform who say, look, I don't want to do repatriation because I'd rather do overall tax reform. I said, fine, bring the tax reform bill to the floor. Then I don't need to do repatriation. But in the meantime, let's do repatriation.
Right.
If we're not going to have tax reform, let's do something. And the argument always was, well, if we do repatriation, then tax reform's never going to happen. It was the typical,
Right.
I need the perfect time. Well, there is no perfect time. And I was focused on trying to get the economy moving. So if you can reduce that debt even further and have those companies bring those resources back and have them reinvest in job creation here in America, you have, the unemployment rate. I mean, if you look at that, if you look at the pipeline, that would have brought down unemployment. A few other things you could have done, and we'd have a real reduction in unemployment, and then some growth in consumer confidence and some growth in economic output. But none of that was happening. So I and again, the way I would do this moving forward, Mike, is you don't want one package. It's too cumbersome. You need to do it piecemeal. So if you divide it on the.
No more 1,000-page bills.
Right. So do them one, and, you know, take corporate and take individual. Let's see what we can accomplish on the individual side. You know, I would absolutely support reducing the number of rates that we have, simplifying the code. That gets a little tricky, because there are a lot of entities that benefit from the existing code, because the existing code is so big. But you've got to simplify it, and, you know, let's start with at least simplifying the code, trying to find a tax form that works, and reducing the rates from 6 to maybe 4 or 3. And I'd love to have 2 rates, but, you know, I'll work with whoever it is on the other side and say, okay, you want 3 or 4 rates? I mean, let's make this easier for Americans. There might be an opportunity, you know, with this distrust in the IRS, there might be an opportunity to get something done on the individual tax side. But I'm hopeful that at least if you have a Republican Senate, we can get things at least to the president's desk. Before, we couldn't do that. You know, there's so much that we did in the House that was bipartisan.
Well,
And that was the key.
Things have gone through the House even now, even in this term, right? And it's just never come up in the Senate.
Well, just on jobs bills alone, I think there were 30 jobs bills that we passed that never got, and I think almost all of them were supported bipartisanly. And various levels of bipartisanship. You know, some were smaller, but some were, you know, 30, 40. You get 30 or 40 Democrats to come with you. That's a pretty good number. Those bills, a lot of those bills, I mean, weren't getting through the Senate. So at least if you can get some of these bills that the president was calling for, that we were working on in the House, we would hope that, you know, Harry would take it up. If you don't like our bill, okay, change it. Let's go to a committee of conference, try to work out the process. You know, not everyone at the table is going to agree with what comes out, but if there's enough in that bill that we can all agree on, let's get it to the president. Now we'll be able to do that, if we can win the Senate. And right now, the national pundits and the National Democratic Party is, I don't want to say they're ceding the fact that they're going to lose the Senate, but, you know, they're possible. They're acknowledging the likelihood, the possibility of losing the Senate.
One thing I noticed you said is that you can think that you were talking about how we try to corporate tax something that is a subsidy to big business, but, you know, allowing an entity, whether it's an individual or a corporation, to keep more of your own money is never a subsidy.
Right.
And that's the war of the words.
Yeah.
The vernacular is so important, because they would say cutting corporate taxes is a subsidy to big business, but giving a $500 million cylinder that goes out of it, that's an investment in green energy future. Now, you know, one's a subsidy to big business, one's an investment in green energy future. And in fact,
well,
the first one isn't a subsidy at all. It's just saying,
letting me
let
keep
you
more of my money is
your own
not
money.
that's not a subsidy.
And that's the thing, part with the, you get keep banging.
But that's
away
where
at
the
that
Democrats have been
constantly.
very good
They have
at
been.
defining, you know, far better than we have it, but that definition. And that's, so we need to speak to the heart and the mind. You know, we need to speak to both. And we typically
But
speak to
every
the
time
mind.
someone's up with that, people gotta jump all over them and say, you know, allowing someone to keep more of their own money is
I
not a
agree.
subsidy.
I agree.
Because otherwise, the assumption is the government owns 100% of everything, and anything they allow you to keep is a subsidy.
Well, anyway, does anyone have any other questions? 'Cause I'm gonna try to get home and see my.
What would you try to get back on which committee?
I don't know yet. I mean, I'd like to get through the election first. There will be, there's always turnover. There's quite a bit of turnover right now. I mean, between retirements and then there are some losses and then some retirements. There was a lot of turnover with this current Congress. So part of it is the formula, how many Republicans there are, how many Democrats there are. So, you know, I want to, I'm not going to take for granted at all, you know, the elections before me. Work very hard. I mean, look, the electorate is finicky these days.
How's fundraising?
It's strong. I always want it to be stronger. I mean, our last cycle, you know, last election, we raised $2.2 million. But then at the end of the day, you know, so did Carol. I mean, we had a big lead against her, and then over the summer, she had like a $700,000 or $800,000 quarter because she got help. And, you know, so she'll be well financed. We'll be well financed. Most of her money does not. She doesn't get a lot of support from New Hampshire. I've noticed. You know, her support tends to be more outside the state than inside the state. And she always makes the point that she doesn't take any corporate PAC money, which is funny because she'll take it from members and she'll take it from the DCCC, which is, that's exactly where they get some of their money from. And she gets a lot from the unions. But I think this, you know, she'll be funded, we'll be funded. I think it really, this is more gonna be about turnout and about the frustrations that people have. And that right now, you know, whether you believe the UNH polling or not, and I've got my own opinions on that, but, you know, right now, they say the independents are leaning very heavily toward me versus Carol in their poll that they had last week.
What about the primary?
Well, we don't take it for granted, but the last poll had us up 55 points. I mean, I don't know my opponent too well. I've met him a few times. The things I do know about him, I mean, he was a registered Democrat in 2013, so, you know, I don't look much beyond that. Oh, except for the fact that he supported Jackie Silly for governor in 2012. So yeah, you can say you're a Republican all you want, but,
Right.
you know, when you went with,
That would have a lot to do with why you wouldn't be doing well in the Republican.
That means he thought John Lynch was too conservative.
well, the fact that Maggie, you know, I mean, to
Yeah.
him, I mean, he couldn't go with Maggie. I mean, you know, I mean, the whole Democratic Party went with Maggie.
Right.
And he couldn't go with Maggie, so I don't know. And then in '08, he, when he first was able to vote in New Hampshire, he pulled a Democrat presidential primary ballot. So he either voted for Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton.
So it's pretty much been a Democrat, so it's.
He says he's been a lifelong Republican. I've heard him say it. So but I don't, you know, again, we are working diligently. I mean, we've got lots of support from around the district. We don't take it for granted. I focus most of my, you know, efforts on my campaign in Carroll. I think right now the media is focusing, you know, when they focus on this race, it's more me in Carroll. But, you know, there's still 2 months left before the primary, so I've got to focus on making sure. But, you know, we never take a vote for granted. We're working hard to make sure that we do everything we possibly can. And I think once we get through these primaries and we have, you know, a decision on who our nominees are, then I think the vast majority of people will start to pay attention.
Right now, it's
Yeah, from the primary to the general is 8 weeks. And, you know, New Hampshire always kind of breaks late. So I think most people will start to pay attention, you know, in
Absolutely.
September. Definitely after Labor Day, and then October, and
Well,
that's why you could, you know, look, I think you will see in the governor's race a tightening. Even though Maggie's numbers are as high as they are right now, according to the UNH poll, there will be a tightening, except when you look at New Hampshire, the voter tends to look at federal races differently than it looks at state races. You know, in the biggest year that Republicans had in 2012, John Lynch still won re-election. So it was his closest, you know, race. And it felt more like a race than any other year he had been running for re-election, but he still won. So I think that, you know, that gap will close a little bit, but that race, you know, if you were asking me today, wouldn't be as close as the federal races. But you never know. I mean, what's going to happen? I mean, the electorate wakes up. If they're so angry at this president, which they are saying now, they don't have a reason to be angry at Maggie today. But, you know, whoever the nominee is, if they make the argument that, well, you have no reason to be angry because
She hasn't done anything.
then, you know,
She hasn't done anything wrong, but she hasn't done anything
Yeah, but
right
this
by
is-
my eyes
They
yet.
expanded Medicaid, it's gonna come back and bite us in the butt.
It hasn't cut any ice against anybody else.
It's gonna add on so many more people to that, there's gonna be huge.
But it's going to be, you know, you watch from after September into November. I mean, it's going to be it's going to be wild in New Hampshire. I mean, there's going to be a lot of money on both sides spent.
Especially in Southern Florida, it's Brown versus Shaheen, are you talking about money on expensive?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the governor's race will be expensive. I think that will be probably the most expensive, the Senate race in history. You know, they're looking at my race right now is 2-4. It's probably $8 million that's going to be spent, you know, for the congressional for one seat. That's a lot of money. you know, just for our congressional, for House.
Consider this 434 other
Yeah.
elections across the country.
Yeah, but I mean, there's only so many
Right,
that
right. A lot of them
flip,
are
and this one, DC
competitive
looks
at
at
all.
this,
Yeah.
both the Democrats and the Republicans in DC look at this as a likely flip.
Right.
So the Democrats are gonna wanna spend money protecting it, the Republicans are gonna wanna spend money trying to get it back, and it's just, this seat, since '06, has gone back and forth. It's one of the few in the country, so it's just, regardless of who is running, that's what's gonna happen. You know, our campaigns have to be very good. You know, it almost feels like you gotta have a little luck nowadays. You have to have the wind behind you, whatever party you're part of, and then, you know, to stem the tide, or to strengthen, depending on how you're looking at it, you as a candidate have to be as effective as possible.
Right.
Our goal is to try to figure out how to win, and then how to stop this sort of pendulum every couple of years. I mean, that's really
But that's like you said earlier, when the presidential elections, you get the younger people coming out, and that's when we
Yeah,
tend to
well,
go
we got a
Democratic.
different set of-
And on
yeah.
a non-presidential
We tend to go
campaign, the
Republican.
Republicans
Yeah.
come out, which
Yeah.
are there anyway.
Well, if you're fortunate enough to get reelected, which I hope you do, I hope you continue with some of your telephone
I will.
town halls.
Yeah, when I'm
You
away,
really
I
won
always-
me
yeah.
over with those.
Those were, you know, they were really, I'll tell you why I liked them. So I only did them when I was away, when I was in DC. I never did them when I was here. But regular town halls can be, first of all, they can be a little overwhelming for some people to attend. Because you get you're gonna get the operatives from both sides, and the plants from both sides.
Right.
And that's really the people you don't want to talk to. You want to
Right.
talk to the rest of the people.
Yeah.
You know, that's what you
And
but
they're
that's what happens.
intimidated to get out.
And
They won't
those
pay.
people are intimidated, or, you know, if it's at night, you know, you got other things to do, and, you know, if it's the one that, so the telephone town halls are great. You put on your speakerphone, and, you know, no matter what, I don't know, just answer the call. By accident. It was my brother. So, but, you know, you're having dinner, you put the phone on speaker, you can listen to the conversation. And I always took calls, you know, I mean, you have the computer screen of what people are asking. And, well, I always asked, you know, had people question me, you know, who were opposed to me as much as I did who supported me. I mean, I wanted, you know, the back and forth. I wanted to answer those questions just as much as the ones that you could tell were more favorable to me. And then there were people that you could tell really wanted information. And I think it was a very effective way. It was a little under an hour. A very effective way to communicate with a lot of people and get a lot of questions answered.
Well, I just thought it sent a clear message that you were listening
Yeah.
to what was going on from the state, and not just going to Washington and doing.
Does Carol do them? I mean,
I don't know.
By
Didn't
law,
have anything as far as I'm aware.
I mean, by law, you can't just call your supporters. By law, you have to call everybody. You have to call.
I did one recently, I think.
Did she?
I never received any notice for it.
Well, I got on her email list on purpose. I wanted to see what she was saying. You know, and she stresses her veterans, and of course now
Yeah,
she's
she's
hiding
always-
now that the VA is blowing up in everyone's face. She did one not too long ago. I didn't participate. I
Well, you
found out. Well, well, the problem was that we're sitting down to dinner.
Yeah.
We called it dinner time, and they said we're going to have a town hall and, you know, so forth. But, yes, I would have had a lot to say.
So Frank, one of the things that strikes me that, you know, might be kind of helpful with what you're doing is, you know, we all understand, as, you know, who we are Republicans in that, is that the whole idea of cutting taxes and getting the economy going is to, you know, get things flourishing. But I think it's also good to then, you know, underline what that means, you know, that's real jobs, you know, real growth. And it's like you're caring for people by trying to cut taxes. It's like, okay, we want to, it's obvious to us the benefits, but we need to then, as far as trying to get the messaging right, is to then say, and I know you're doing this, but just to highlight it as far as
I mean, I
competing with the other side, because they say, we're taking care of people, we care about people, they don't. But our message is, we care about people, but we're really going to help. We're really going to give them something that's growing and sincere, not something that's we're borrowing money to provide. We're going to get something that will just take off and grow like wildfire from a provider.
Look, I think tax reform is really a way to spur on economic growth and entrepreneurship. and new business opportunity, which just gives everyone, you know, if you think about, if we can get 7 million people back to work, you think about the economic output that creates, number one. Number two, the reduction of people relying on the federal government for a closed period of time. Third, it provides a level of dignity to somebody that they didn't previously have if they were out of work. And, you know, you think about it, I mean, that's an important component to an individual, to feel like they have a dignified way of taking care of their family. So if we can update, you know, use whatever word you want, reform, update, I mean, I almost like update the code because it's so archaic. But update the code, change the tax system so it can benefit more the individual, have more dollars for growth, be more competitive internationally. There will be, I mean, here's a good example. So we have $18 billion in spread across 9 different agencies, job training money. What drives me crazy forget about whether the federal government should even have that role, you know, Constitution. Forget about that question for a moment. What drives me crazy is 9 agencies. How much money is it costing to administer $18 billion in programs?
Right.
When we're at a time of you know, stagnation and/or recession over this past 6 years. If we could have that money under one roof, administered by one agency, have one committee on the House and Senate oversee it, so you maximize the number of dollars going to real training programs. All of these training programs across the 9 agencies, they don't have any goals and objectives. There's very little oversight. There's very little metrics to determine whether these dollars are working. So, you know, I'm a numbers guy. I mean, I was in business, I ran the city. I mean, you have to be accountable for every dollar, and that should matter. Being accountable for every dollar that is spent should matter when you're elected, because it's someone else's money that you're playing with.
Right. Always easy to be generous over money.
Yeah, but when it's, you know, this is what frustrated me with, if you just put it all under one roof, you reduce costs by changing the administrative costs dramatically. And then if you had, you know, 5 or 6 core, could take you 6, 8, 9, 12 months to put together, here are the 6 or 8 categories. And let's figure out how to get someone who is unemployed, retrained, and then into a job. And that should be the metric.
Right. To see if it's successful. I mean, it's only based
That
on
should be the
how much
metric. How many
money did
people
they
were
spend?
we able to get off unemployment compensation rolls? Because we spent some money on job retraining and then had job growth for them to get into a job.
Right.
Now, by the way, there's another problem. We still have people, I mean, I talk to businesses who have jobs where they can't find the skill set to fill those jobs, right here in New Hampshire.
Right.
I've been to companies in Rochester, in Portsmouth, in Londonderry, down 125 there, Kingston, a couple of other.
Turbocam?
Yeah, they're growing. TurboCam is growing. But some of these companies can't find the skill set to fill the job. So, you know, I just think we need some common sense in how to administer these programs. And we're not seeing that. So when I was on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee.
Can they not find people to do?
Well, I'll give you 2 examples. So, you know, there's a company that, ENR Cleaners. I know the owner of ENR Cleaners, and he's got a $40,000 a year job in his cleaning clothes. He's got 5 openings. You can't fill them. 40 plus benefits.
And you get to some unique skill set that are off work at a dry cleaning?
No, that's not skill set based. He just
Can't find anybody?
That's a whole other.
he just can't find someone to take the job.
That's real work.
It is real work. But it's a job. And it can lead to something better. But it's $40,000 a year plus bennies.
$40,000 a year is median income in New
I
Hampshire.
don't think it's, I thought it was, I thought we were over 50.
But still,
But it's
one
not,
person.
it's not chump change.
Party level, you know?
Yeah, now, TurboCam is different. I mean, that's more of a skilled labor. You're talking $25 an hour.
I mean, where do you find the guys, the machines they have that are still incredible?
Right.
I mean, I don't even know where they find, they must have to train the people.
Well, they have to find
Go
it
to
from out of
school.
state.
They go to school.
And, but this is the problem, we need, we're losing younger people
Right.
who are leaving the state for whatever reason, they can't afford it. I mean, in-state tuition at UNH is not cheap.
No.
Yeah, so you can find as good or better education cheaper out of state. And we lose those kids. Our apprentice programs, which need to start in high school, we're starting to grow those a little bit. I saw that when I was doing my manufacturing summits. We are starting to grow those, but that needs to be a lead issue, for our governor.
Yeah, that's something, what we do with the not found material cohorts.
Look at how our community college,
It's a real challenge.
but our community
For our whole
colleges
economy.
have changed over the last 10 years. I mean, they're getting much more competitive. They're able to offer opportunity to kids today that they couldn't 10 years ago, because now they're starting to work with companies in what the skill sets require. But they, so some of these colleges use the job training money. Some of the community colleges, I think New Hampshire, I forget how much we got 15, 18, 19 million, somewhere around there. And I think the bulk of it went to one school. I have to go do the research.
Well, the highly educated and high-tech is the jobs you can't fill. I listen to Fred Coker every now and then.
Sure,
He has
yeah.
people on there, and it's very interesting,
Yeah.
because to get people, they gotta go out of state to find the people.
There are jobs.
And,
There are jobs
you
at
know,
different levels.
I'm watching all my grandchildren now, high school, college, one went to NHTI, which is okay.
Sure,
They've come a
absolutely,
long way, like you
absolutely.
just said. But the guidance counselors in the high school are not doing our children a favor. Push them into college, push them into college. They go and they get a
Philosophy.
BA in sociology,
The BA in
and it
math, right,
leads nowhere.
You're in debt.
But they tell them, the mistake I hate is they tell them, you get a degree, you'll get a job. And that's not true anymore, not at all.
Well, not with
Get
the,
jobs, maybe get a job in McDonald's.
the economy is not supporting, the economy's gotta grow in order for that to happen.
Right. That's right.
But we just had a retraction in the first quarter,
Right.
of almost 3%. I mean,
We could be going into another recession.
I don't think we're there yet, but it's not,
Yeah.
well, recession, I think, is defined, is it
Negative
two?
economic growth.
Negative growth, yeah.
I don't.
That's just
I
a definition.
certainly hope,
Yeah.
I certainly don't hope we don't have another quarter of negative economic growth.
I'm a contractor.
Yeah,
I cannot keep up. I put a person on. I can't keep up. I like to judge the growth of the economy locally by my trade.
but it's interesting, because I met with the home dealer, the home builders, and they're not seeing what you're,
It's still mixed.
I
Some
just
people
met with them a
don't
month
do it.
ago, and
Yeah.
they said in some areas of the state are doing well, but others are doing so poorly.
Right.
It's not across the entire.
It's not, no, I
spectrum.
agree.
More remodeling than new, too, I think.
Well, the remodeling's been going on for the last 5, 6 years. I stepped away from having a framing crew and building houses years ago, and that was my savior over these last 8 years. But I'm seeing things pick up enough that I'm gonna build a house in August. And I haven't built a house in a long time. So I've got additions and remodeling and all of that going on.
It depends on.
Look
it
at the
really
number of
depends on
houses
the
for
area.
sale in Strafford.
Right?
It's scary.
Well, you know why, but we won't use, we'll do that another day, not with this gentleman.
But it's, when you rank the top sort of 17 sectors in New Hampshire, for 2013, almost